Hello and welcome. I am so excited for you to hang out with me while I work on painting this cat's eye. So this is essentially me preparing for a workshop that I was about to do. I always do a smaller preliminary sketch, if you will, and complete it before I ever teach anybody else. So come along and see how I paint an eye. Fine, I have traced my cat out and I'm ready to roll. I cannot find my eraser though. Found it. It's my eraser. I'm using a gummed eraser to lift some graphite. This sketch I made sure was really simple. We do not need to go crazy with the sketch. We need to ask, what information do we need? We don't want to, if we're tracing, we don't want to trace everything. We need to know what's going on with the eyes. We need to know the highlights. We need to make sure everything's in its right place, but you do not need to add everything. So, all right. I always start with the eyes. If you have ever seen my work, you will know that the eyes come first. So I'm just going to prop this up ever so slightly. And I keep dropping stuff. I'm not sure why I'm dropping things today. Here's our cat. I'm going to start with the eyes. Now, I've got these little brushes that I got at Hobby Lobby. I actually really love these, surprisingly. They're just cheap, synthetic brushes. Oh, they're so good for the eyes. So avoiding the highlight in the eyes, and I need to zoom in for you. I am going to start with the left eye. Belle, stop. The carpet's not going to get fluffier. And I'm going to focus on the lightest value area in the eye. And so I'm going to, ooh, you know what? I just had a thought. Quin gold would be really pretty. So if you ever want to add light to an eye, Quin gold is your color. And I forgot I even had that on my dot card for a second. So you can just start. I'm going in on dry paper. I don't do wet and wet often from like right off the start because I do like putting paint on dry paper. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the whole colored part of the eye. I'm avoiding highlights and I'm avoiding the pupil. You don't have to. I just am. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of my blue and green and just start dropping. So this is where I start getting into more of that wet and wet. And with cat eyes, wet and wet can be really fun because you can get some really cool textures. So over here, we've got a little more green going on. And then right here, I'm going to grab some of that brownish color. And we're going to put it on this side. And depending on the humidity and the temperature where you are, you may get different drying times. Eyes are so fun. They've got to be my favorite. I'm going to switch out my brush, grab something a little smaller. Smaller can be tricky. It's not always better. I'm really working to avoid those highlights. Now, like I said, with texture, we can use blooms and blossoms and cauliflowers to our advantage. And I'm constantly looking back and forth at my reference photo. It's really important to me. Now, let me go ahead and dry this layer before I do anything else. Oftentimes when you keep trying to add paint on a wet layer, what you end up doing is lifting paint that you don't want to lift. So I'm just being cautious about that. Another technique that I use quite often is I just squint my eyes. I'm always squinting my eyes at my reference and my painting. Now, once I've put paint down on dry paper, I'm going to grab a brush and I'm going to clean it, dry it, and just use it gently, gently to soften edges. Now, knowing when to have a hard edge and when to have a soft edge, it's just something that comes with time and experience. So just keep painting and looking at that reference, deciding where the edges are, and eventually you'll get it. We want to make sure we're still achieving light in these eyes. And the biggest thing about watercolor is layering. Just layering, layering, layering. Drying between each layer, whether that means walking away and letting it dry naturally or grabbing your heat tool and making it dry by blow drying it. Now, these highlights, if they do end up disappearing, I will use an opaque medium at the end. I want to avoid that if I can. I like to save the whites of the paper. I've used masking fluid in the past, and that is a great way to do it. But as time has gone on, I've just kind of stopped using masking fluid. Okay, it's time for the dark. I really want to bring this eye together by adding that dark in the middle. So I've got this tiny brush. I'm making sure everything's dry. Sometimes it's hard to tell if the eye's done yet until you add the darks. And boy, doesn't that bring it together. Here, let me zoom in for you. I'm just quietly concentrating. We will need to do this inner eye fleshy part, and we'll just use the pink we're using for the ear. Now you'll want to pay attention on the black parts, how thin or thick the different, we call it eyeliner, how thin or thick they are. Okay, now I'm going to take a clean, pretty damp brush and see if we can't drag this edge out just a little bit. This dark area. And then that pink fleshy part is hidden in shadow. I always use Potter's Pink for this. So we didn't list that, but I will add Potter's Pink right there. So Potter's Pink and Piemontite Genuine are great for this shadowy, fleshy area. And it is hidden in shadow, so we need to give it some depth. It's not this bright. So what you can do is dull it down with like a little neutral tint or some burnt umber, something like that, just to kind of bring it back down and tone it down a little bit. And speaking of toning down, there's just areas on this eye that I want to keep darkening. This is what gives the eye the depth that it needs. Is just keep looking at it. Eyes are so much fun. Now I do feel like I've lost that highlight a little bit, so what I'm going to do is use a little bit of this, or I can use this watercolor stick in titanium white. This is not as opaque as this is, so I will just use a little bit of this. It's water soluble. I'll mix it with a little bit of water, and as long as this eye is dry, I can go ahead and add these little highlights back in. And it just makes such a big difference. Making that eye look a little more realistic. You know, eyes are actually really the only thing I will sit and fuss with on a painting, because they are the most important to me for looking realistic. So essentially that's how I did this eye, and I replicated the same steps for this eye. However, this eye is in shadow a little bit more, so I had to do a few layers more on this eye to achieve kind of that darker value. But it's the same concept for all eyes. Of course, different eyes, different animals, they have different nuances and whatnot, but at the end of the day, we're just painting shapes and values. So if you can remember that, you can paint any eye. I appreciate you hanging out with me while I painted this. If you're interested in seeing my entire process and you want to paint along, I now offer the replay of that workshop on my website. The link will be in the description, and you can virtually hang out with me in my studio and we can paint this together. And here is the final. That painting was just kind of my trial run. And here is the final painting. This is 11 by 15 or A4 size. And this one is 7 by 11. So you can see the size difference there. This is essentially double the size. But this is the size I do all my pet portraits in. I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. And gosh, those eyes were so much fun to paint. Thanks again for being here. Thanks again for hanging out. You know I love ya. Have an amazing day.